Y'all, I'm gonna shoot you straight right now. Am I about to be the first Team Innova player to bag the groove officially? Whew, that flight is something else. That is something else. What is up, YouTube fam? Robbie C here. We are back with the final episode of our Building the Bag series, where I'm going through the Innova lineup, testing out so many molds, trying to see which ones work best for me and using a few guiding principles along the way. My hope is that you can use these same principles to narrow down the selection in your bag. As always, this series would not be possible without the team over at otbdiscs.com. OTB is literally the best, I mean, it's in the name, online disc golf retailer out there. If you want to support what they're doing and what we're doing here at the channel, it would mean a ton if you'd head over to otbdiscs.com and use code RCDiscGolf at checkout to save on some free shipping. And trust me, there are some solid ones today that you're definitely going to want to check out. So without further ado, let's head to the field and see if we can start crushing some distance drivers. But honestly, before we dive into that, I've got to address something that caught me a lot of flack in the last video, and that is the Thunderbird. I think this disc is absolutely incredible. It's honestly a cheat code disc. It goes into the range of a distance driver with still having the control and ease of a fairway driver. In fact, it's so good, it narrowed down some options that I considered for distance drivers. When I start thinking of the distance driver category, I'm thinking anywhere between 350 and beyond. Similar to fairway drivers, I'm not looking for specific lines, but more so landing zones that I need to get to, and discs that will allow me to get to multiple landing zones with just one mold or one disc. Because of that, my biggest guiding principle is how the discs feel in my hand. The first thing I wanted to do was go through a ton of distance driver options and see how they felt throwing them on hyzer flip backhands and flat release backhands. I started with some 10 speeds, the Orc, the Mystere, and a Beast. These are pretty classic molds, and I liked how they felt in my hand. But if I'm being honest, I kept going back to the Thunderbird and realizing that most of the shots I could pull off with these discs, I could also pull off with the Thunderbird. And because I'm pretty committed to the Thunderbird, I just decided, you know what, as good as they are, it's just not going to be for me. Next, I wanted to look at some more unique Innova molds, see how they flew and what they were all about. The first was the Daedalus, which is supposed to be a super understable bomber disc. My thoughts on the Daedalus are that it is rather neutral, so if you put it on Anhyzer, it's going to hold Anhyzer for a really long time, but I don't think that it's so understable. Call it wrong expectations on me or wrong selling by other people who told me about it. Either way, I didn't feel great about how this disc felt in my hand or how I was throwing it. Another unique but incredibly polarizing mold within the Innova community is the Groove. I was stoked to test out the Groove because as someone who's really anti-bullying, I wanted to see what all the hate was about for this disc, and I was shocked. The first throw I had with it felt super good, and I was pumped to give it another rip. I thought maybe that was a bad one. It's okay. We love the Groove. Give the Groove a chance. On second thought, that's going to be a no. I just happened to throw it really well the first time. So yeah. Sorry, Groove. We tried. Can I get you a cookie? The next one I heard about from a friend named Robbie up in Huntsville, and it was the Firestorm. I was absolutely blown away by this mold. Whenever I threw it well, it seemed to go crazy far, and even when I didn't seem to throw it that well, it still went pretty far. I knew the Firestorm had some positives, so it's definitely making it to the next round. Next up was the Shrike. I've heard so many people give positive reviews, and so I really wanted to give it high hopes, but it was the first one to really show me the flaw of my method of going through the bag. I'm not out here throwing these discs 100 times, so it gets really hard to see how it actually works and what is a series of bad shots or a series of really good shots. I just kind of have to go off of my gut feeling, and my gut feeling, I don't know why, it just didn't seem to vibe with the Shrike. Next was a mold that I used to throw a ton of, and I absolutely loved it when I threw it, and that was a Boss, Wakanda Forever. The Boss was really solid, and it felt pretty good in the hand, and in the Blizzard Champion plastic, that thing goes really, 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 really far. So I had to look at the obvious. It felt good in my hand, but it wasn't giving me great results. Therefore, it just wasn't a great fit for me right now. I then moved on to another mold a Birdie fan member had recommended, and that was the Turn. Y'all, the first several times that I threw the Turn, I was absolutely blown away. In fact, before I threw the Firestorm, I would say that the Turn was the disc that shocked me more than any other mold in the Innova lineup. What the Turn felt like was a beat-in Wraith on the first half of its flight, and then a Destroyer for the last half of its flight. I knew it was going to be a no-brainer that that it made it to the next round, but we had to include it. And we mentioned them earlier, but we had to move on to the king and queen of the Innova lineup, the Wraith and the Destroyer. I'll let you decide which one's the king and which one's the queen. A running joke in my family is that you can't be a Crawford unless you absolutely love a Wraith. If I had to describe the flight of a beat-in Wraith, I would describe it as perfect. You can throw it on Anhyzer, it flips up to flat, turns to the right, and then still has enough fade in it to come back at the very end. And in the halo plastic, they are way more overstable, but it's still somewhat reliable and workable. Let's ask the hard-hitting questions. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? The answer: the Destroyer. It would be a crying shame to talk about distance drivers without mentioning the Innova Destroyer. I love the feel of a Destroyer, I love the profile of a Destroyer, and I love the flight of a Destroyer, especially when you find one that's nice and seasoned. After trying all of those, we had our 4 molds selected for going to the next stage, Anhyzer turnovers. There are really 2 types of stability I wanted to be able to throw on this line. The first is a disc that is understable enough to be able to hold that Anhyzer the entire way without necessarily turning into a cut roller because it hits the ground too early. The second is a disc that when thrown high enough and not throwing it nose up is going to ride that Anhyzer and then flex out at the very end. I don't want to have a disc that I have to throw really hard on that Anhyzer just to get it to stay in that angle. The turn held an Anhyzer really well, but sometimes it did cut roll because it was the most understable option we had. The Destroyer, on the other hand, did the opposite, and it really felt like I had to mush on a Destroyer to get it to hold that Anhyzer line, which might have been a sign for things to come. The Firestorm and Wraith did exactly what I was looking for, and so it really started coming down to 3 options heading into our last test: forehands. This was the hard part because I love throwing forehand Destroyers. I had a Destroyer that was in my bag for about 6 years that I exclusively threw on forehands. I got so used to having that disc that ever since then there has always been a slot in my bag for a somewhat overstable forehand disc. I also love trying to throw understable discs on forehands to Anhyzer flip them and get some crazy cool distances. The turn absolutely bombed when I hit it on the right angles. The Firestorm was similar in that it absolutely bombed when I hit it right, but it also had a little more stability. I've thrown race for a long time, and one thing I've learned about Halo race is that the double G race are not as stable as the original run of Halo race that came out. And you can throw them on some really cool Anhyzer flex lines with a forehand when necessary. The Destroyer felt like going home throwing it on a forehand, but looking at the other options, it was time to start narrowing down what's actually going in the bag. So on the understable side of things, for the first time in really this entire Building the Bag series, I can't decide which one goes in the bag. The Firestorm completely blew me away. I was not expecting to fall in love with a mold this fast, but I really love the turn as well, and it has been so fun to throw. At the same time though, anyone that's played with me recently knows that I've talked about my frustration with trying to learn this disc. I feel like there's a perfect sweet spot to releasing this disc to give it that beautiful flex line that we're looking for, but just a couple more degrees of Anhyzer and it rides it the entire way without flipping up. On the opposite side though, if I don't put enough Anhyzer on it, then it's going to instantly roll over. So for now, we're gonna put both of them in there and let them duke it out and see which one comes out on top. Next is my Super Beat-In Star Wraith. This Wraith came in my first ever sponsored box from Airwolf Athletics, and I've loved it ever since. In fact, so much so that I put 2 more Wraiths in the bag. The first is a double G Wraith. It's a Wraith, so I have that subconscious confidence of how the disc feels in my hand, but the Halo plastic gives it some extra stability. Honestly, it flies like a stock Star Destroyer. Right now, I don't think I have the arm speed or capability to throw a Destroyer as easily as I can throw a Wraith. And so if I can just bag a Halo Wraith and still have that subconscious confidence, why would I not go with that? For that overstable forehand exclusive disc, well, let's go with, oh yeah, another Halo Wraith. And lastly is a super utility disc that I only pull out probably once every like 20 rounds. A Calvin Halo Destroyer. The moment you throw it, it's trying to get to the ground. And no matter what headwind you're facing, you know that this disc is going to go straight and still fade out at the end. So with these 6 distance drivers, oh yeah, and a Thunderbird, I feel incredibly confident. All in all, I'm pumped to finally have my bag figured out. Well, I guess like 95% of it. Thank you so much for sticking with us throughout this entire series. I am so excited to head into the off season to help you maximize the next few months so that when we head into 2022, we've got nothing but confidence and amazing results awaiting us. Thank you so much for coming by. I hope you have an amazing week. But for now, I'm gonna leave you with the birdie.